Hello, everyone. As I mentioned in class on Monday, this Wednesday and Friday, I am going to be attending a conference, therefore unable to be in class to be with you and have this conversation live. So I had no choice but to record, and you knew that because it's marked on my tentative outline. But anyway, here we are. The one thing I want to mention before we start is that I just realized that we don't have enough material for 2 hours really. So I don't even know if we are going to meet 1 hour. So what I am going to do is that this recording is going to be for both Wednesday, April 20th, and also Friday, April the 21st. So consider this lecture covering 2 days of classes. And the idea is just to finish the material on this long Word document of 23 pages, so that on Monday, after everybody comes back over the weekend, after the weekend, we can start a brand new section on Latin America-US relations, which I think is going to be interesting as well. So again, there is no point to ask you anything because you are not listening live. So I'm just going to go on and share my screen so we can start talking about the last of these 3 sections in this long Word document. As I mentioned, the last section is labor markets and employment, and I also mentioned this, that finding a job in Latin America, a formal job, is one of the most important and biggest challenges individually for citizens of any Latin American country, but particularly as a society for economic development purposes. Because if you don't have a formal job, not only you are not paying taxes and you are not following the codes that we mentioned, like environmental codes, labor codes, safety codes, but also you're not protected. When you don't have a formal job, you are not covered by Social Security if the country where you live or work and have one has one. You are not protected by any laws because you, by definition, operate in the extra-legal environment. And as a consequence of these two, no protections, no taxes, well, the government doesn't have enough resources to provide public goods and public resources like schools, hospitals, roads. So everything stagnates. Everything is moving backwards, really. So, like I said, many Latin American people are concerned about the lack of jobs, low wages, and obviously the possibility of being unemployed. Just to give an idea of how bad things were and are still bad, during the 1990s, employment grew at a smaller pace than the second half of the 80s. Now, if you remember, the 1980s is considered the lost decade because GDP per capita dropped rather than went up. So the 80s are considered one of the worst 10 years ever in the economic history of Latin America. Well, in the 90s, employment, not every indicator got worse, but particularly employment grew very, very slow, even at a slower speed than during these worst 10 years that I just mentioned. So I briefly mentioned this in class on Monday, but I want to emphasize that when Latin America made the shift from the import substitution industrialization strategy, the ISI strategy, towards a export-led strategy, from protectionism, just looking inwards, to export promotion, looking outwards, to insert Latin America into globalization. This basically meant a shift in the production structure from non-tradable goods to tradable goods and services. So what does that mean? Well, think about this. When Latin America was under the ISI model, they didn't have to be concerned about exports or anything like that had to do with international trade or international finance because the market was captive. the market was domestic. Everything was non-tradable. And by that, I mean not internationally tradable. The idea was to produce for domestic consumption. But then after the debt crisis of the 80s, the economic production structure is shifting from these non-tradable to tradable goods and services. So that basically means that now Latin American production has to be concerned with quality, efficiency, and all of these things that globalization implies. But many Latin American people were not ready for this. Now they have to move from one sector, non-tradable, to the tradable sector. And that has been a huge challenge. It's not over. It's not over. And this is, again, one of the options that many people, I'm sorry, this is one of the challenges that many people face. And therefore, like I said in class, there are three options. Either they migrate internationally to another country because they have to find alternatives. Either they engage in criminal activities, or number three, they go to the informal economy. And that's why we saw these couple of videos on Monday, one for Mexico and one for Peru. So in your notes, you have these 10 points that are trying to give you a picture of what's happening or what happened in Latin America after all of these structural changes that took place. So let me go one by one really quick so that we can cover this part. So number one, job creation is low. I mentioned this already. Employment has grown at an average growth rate of 2.8% in the 1990s, and it's around 3% right now, which again is lower than the worst years of the 80s. Now, one small kernel of good news is that the supply of workers has also diminished. So this is a very interesting demographic phenomena that takes place anywhere in the world. So as the population ages, the fertility rate goes down. And also as the economy develops, the fertility rate goes down as well. So this is why, for example, in European countries like Germany and others, or in Asia like Japan, the population, rather than going up, is going down. So every year, the number of people dying is higher than the number of people being born. And this is how the population is shrinking. Latin America has not reached that point. But 20, 40 years ago, the average number of children was about 2.5, or even reaching 3 per family. Now it's below 2. So the fertility rate is going down because aging of the population and because of economic development advancing in Latin America. Now, obviously, as less children are being born, the supply of workers is also going down. And I said this is kind of a kernel of good news because, well, you don't want to have many people without a job. You don't want to have many workers not working. Now, the flip side of that is that if you have an aging population that because of age cannot work, now you are going to have a smaller proportion of the population that have to be supporting this aging population. And this is one of the challenges in Japan, in Germany. But of course, these countries have all the safety nets to assist the elderly. In Latin America, they don't have any of that. So that's going to be an interesting challenge in the next 20, 30 years for Latin America. Who is going to be taking care of the aging population? Because the number of those supporting them is going smaller and smaller and smaller. So this number 2 is a very interesting one that have to do with the demography and the demographic transitions that countries go through. Number 3, unemployment rates have not fallen, despite the fact, like I said, that the number of workers being born is being reduced. Roughly speaking, the unemployment rate in Latin America, and again, some countries have higher unemployment rates like Venezuela or Bolivia right now, while others have lower unemployment rates like Colombia and Costa Rica, but on average it's around 10%. One problem with this indicator, which is not unique to Latin America, is the accuracy. Different methodologies and the inconsistency over time produce some glitches in the way they gather the data, in the way they calculate the numbers. So this 10% is the official number, but if you consider the underemployed, which is, or the employed in the informal sector, this 10% can easily escalate to 40% or even higher than that in some countries. So, you have to take this indicator with a grain of salt. It's not strictly comparable to say the unemployment rates in the US or the unemployment rates in Europe or Asia. It's a very unique type of unemployment rate indicator, the one that we use in Latin America, because as you know, the informal sector is huge. So just think about that. And of course, like I said, number 4, the informal employment has increased. And you saw in the videos that in Mexico, for example, 1/3 of the new jobs are coming from the informal sector. According to my notes throughout the region, and this is also one of the, it was shown in one of the videos, an average of 80% of the new jobs are informal. So Mexico is one of the good ones, only 1/3. But other countries have a huge amount of growth in the informal sector. There is a very famous book, again, by the same economists that we discussed, these economists from Peru. The book is called The Other Path. So what is the first path? Well, the first path that in Peru was seen is the Shining Path, and that was a terrorist group that in the 80s began planting bombs and killing people, and it was a manifestation of social discontent that was very violent. They tried to grab power with weapons and bombing, and it was a terrible thing. So what Hernando de Soto is talking about is the other path, which is another manifestation of social discontent, but not expressed with violence. This is the precise origin of the informal sector. So many people with, with a more decent moral compass, rather than taking the weapons, they start selling stuff on the street. They start selling goods and services outside the law on the extra legal world. And this is a very famous book. It's a bestseller. It's a very well written book by Hernando de Soto. I don't have a copy in the office. I think I have it at home. But if you want some really good recount of what is the origin of the informal sector, this is a good start by Hernando de Soto. Now, talking about this, if you remember, when we talk about the Washington Consensus, they were talking about liberalizing markets. And of course, the labor market is included in this recipe, this neoliberal, neoclassical recipe. So the idea, I'm highlighting this here on the screen, is to eliminate any type of distortion in the labor market. So you don't want to have powerful unions. You don't want to have significant payroll taxes. You don't want to have minimum wages. You want to reduce the number of the state sector. You want to reduce the size of the government. The idea, the original idea, and the argument behind this is that by doing this, companies, for example, will have a chance to have more flexibility to hire people. They wouldn't be so constrained by cost, like minimum wages or payroll taxes. And at the same time, people will have more freedom to move from one company to the other. So the idea was to foster, through these policies, to foster formal employment. Did that work? Not very well, because, like I said, the concentration market concentration in some industries is really, really big. So large corporations dominate, and through mechanization, automation, and many other processes, they can really drive many other companies out of business. So this effort to amplify the flexibility to hire and fire people didn't really work in terms of increasing formal employment. And obviously, many people, when they discover the sweet deal that working in the informal economy is, the appetite to work for a company became less and less attractive, right? Because working in the informal sector, you don't have a boss, you don't pay all these taxes, you don't follow all these codes, and you can move if you need to, and you can close if you need to. I mean, the flexibility is just unbelievable compared to working in a corporation, in the rigidities of formality. So that did not work. Number 5, the employment rates have increased in the non-tradable goods sector. So this is very interesting because the original thought was that now that Latin America was going to be inserting itself into the globalization era, more trade, more finance, the tradable sector was going to grow, but it didn't. In fact, the situation in Latin America is the opposite. You have a lot of construction, a lot of services. These are the sectors that are growing, but they are not trading internationally. Most of this is still for domestic consumption. And again, this just speaks to the failure in some sense of the neoliberal policies that in paper, in theory, they seem to be very logical and like the next step into the development process. But in practice, they just have not produced the expected results. Number 6 is also interesting because remember, another element of the Washington Consensus was privatization, selling publicly owned enterprises to the private sector. So the idea, if you remember, was to shift from very inefficient hands that have no talent, bureaucrats running companies, to entrepreneurs, people with the knowledge and the skills and the connections to make companies grow and prosper. Well, the problem is that, well, number one, like we mentioned in class several times, Latin America didn't have the entrepreneurial class that was ready to compete internationally. But more importantly, this shift from public to private hands implied a significant amount of efficiency, a significant amount of reduction in size, and therefore, once the companies that previously were employing a large number of public employees, now they are firing and laying off millions and millions of workers because, well, they are not needed now in the most efficient private hands. So public employment fall, but that was not matched by an increase in private employment. So many of these people that got laid off and were fired because they were working for public-owned enterprises, again, didn't have many options. Once again, migration, crime, or informal sector. And that's another part of the story. That's another part of the story. Where are these people coming from? Well, again, partially they are the result of the implementation of neoliberal policies. In this case, privatization. Yeah. Another kernel of good news is that wages have been recovering because obviously productivity has gone up and wages have to match this increase in productivity. But the problem is that these benefits, wages going up, only go to those working in the formal sector. And as I already said, the formal sector is not growing very much. So although wages are, kind of recovering, the vast majority of the population, we just talk about like 80% of them work in the informal sector, are not really seeing the benefits of this. And number 8, I think I mentioned this in class. Actually, I drew a picture, and in particular, this chart was part of my dissertation when I finished my PhD. I mentioned that I was interested in measuring the wage differentials between skilled and unskilled workers over time in Latin America. And actually, you can see it here. Let me see if I can draw something here. Annotate. And here is a line. I'm going to use this line. So you see this line right here, or rather this trend right here. So what you have here in this wage differential is the ratio of the unskilled labor to the ratio of skilled labor to unskilled labor, the top 10% divided by the bottom 10%. And you can see that over time, more skilled workers relative to unskilled workers are making more and more and more and more money. And again, this is basically what we have been talking about before, the premium to skills. Globalization, technological improvements pay a premium to skill. If you have a high school degree or less, or, I think this is going to happen. If you have a college degree or less, you are not going to be as valuable as if you have a college degree or more. Certifications, a master's degree, some sort of technical training on top of the college degree, then the market is not going to see you as attractive. So yeah, these numbers right here, this blue trend right here is for Latin American countries. So yeah, in Latin America, again, this is another ingredient that explains the high and persistent wage and income inequality all throughout the region, which is, well, really, really, really bad. Let me go back here to explain this. In my notes, I have this idea of a global glut of unskilled workers. So again, I just want to formalize this a little bit so that you can have this in writing. But basically, think about this. Roughly speaking, the global labor force, that means every single worker in the world, is coming from two different, with two different characteristics. And again, I am simplifying, but I think it's gonna get the point across. On the one hand, you have highly skilled workers, and I mentioned this in class. This is an elite group of people that have the following characteristics: well-educated, strong, marketable skills, linked by a global culture, multilingual, mobile, and scarce. So this is the successful group of workers. This is the type of profile that you want to develop for yourself if you really want to make it in this globalized world. On the other hand, you have the low-skilled workers, and look, they are poorly educated, not very skilled. They are tied to their local culture and language, not multilingual. They don't want to move, and they are increasingly abundant. So, okay, you have these two pools: the skilled workers and the unskilled workers with the characteristics that I mentioned. Now, at the same time, you have two forces pushing in the same direction. Technology, which I mentioned already here, that is reducing the demand for unskilled labor because of mechanization, robotization, and so forth. But also, number two, globally, although in Latin America fertility rates are going down, globally, if you consider African countries, particularly African countries, the supply of the low-skilled workers is going up very, very, very quickly, very quickly. So when you combine all these, these two pools of labor and these two forces, you have a global glut of unskilled workers, right? Because technology demands skill, which is scarce. And the increasing number of workers that globalization doesn't like produces this glut, this abundance of not highly valuable, in the eyes of the globalized markets, not highly valuable workers, right? So in Latin America, things are getting a bit better again, just because fertility rates are going down, the supply of unskilled workers is going down, but still the problem is that although they are smaller in number, they are not getting educated. They are not very mobile. They don't speak 2 or 3 languages. They are tied to their local culture. So it helps that they are not as many, but it doesn't help that they don't change, right? So think about that. We need to figure out a way to increase the skill level of this smaller number of Latin American workers. Otherwise, they are going to miss the train. They're going to miss the globalization train. Yeah. Oh, actually, I said 10. It's only 8. For some reason, I was thinking it was 10. That's okay. Now, here is something very interesting, guys. This particular section, this one right here. The neoliberal, neoclassical ideas, again, is the dominant paradigm in the world right now. So it's not just Latin America. This is happening in the US, in Europe, in Asia, with a few exceptions like North Korea, perhaps Cuba, China at some extent. But for the most part, the dominant paradigm is free markets, free international trade, free international finance, where international labor mobility, international division of labor is supposed to dominate in this quest to increase the efficiency of the world economy, right? So when workers are used more productively, output is supposed to expand. And we talk about this when we talk about the Heckscher-Ohlin model that was based on the ideas of Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Remember that? The problem with this model is that it works if all factors of production are mobile. So right now, around the world, you can move money, you can move goods, you can move services, but you cannot move one key factor of production, which is labor. So the point I'm trying to make is that labor is like the missing link in the globalization argument. Europeans, for example, understand this really, really well. And this is why, if, for example, you are a French worker, with your French passport, you can go to Italy and find a job in Italy, even if you are not Italian or German or Spain. All throughout the European Union, there is free movement of labor across countries. And this is why, you know, the European Union is getting more efficient and more powerful, because they understand that you have to include labor in this argument of labor mobility, international division of labor, for globalization to work. In the US, obviously, this is not happening. I mean, it is happening in the sense that you have a lot of undocumented workers crossing the border, but it's not a free movement of labor. You know, many people believe that if, let's say, the US opened its borders completely, you know, the US was going to be flooded by millions and millions of workers. Clearly, that's not going to happen, because why would they move here if they have no jobs, if they have no houses, if they have nothing? I mean, this is not going to happen, but of course, that's the fear. The point is, in North America, Central America, South America, all countries are still safely guarded, safely guarding their borders when it comes to labor mobility. And this is one of the main reasons this whole argument of efficiency, regional efficiency or world efficiency, is not working very well, with the exception of Europe. Again, Europe is the exception because these guys understand this really well. They saw this early on. They had to include labor as part of this free mobility of resources. So they are in many senses ahead of the rest of the world. They are facing other challenges, and this is why the European Union is still struggling. You know, the UK just abandoned them. You have a few players like Italy and Greece that have huge amount of debt. They don't have fiscal discipline. Anyway, there are a lot of other problems. But when it comes to factor mobility, they got it. They got it. Anywhere in the world, everywhere else in the world, they have not, right? So think about that. Labor mobility across borders is the missing link of the globalization era. When that happens, when any worker anywhere in the world can work legally and easily with all the flexibility that the arguments imply anywhere in the world, then we can talk about true international labor mobility, true international division of labor, and a true quest for world economy efficiency. We are not there yet. We are not, particularly in Latin America, because we are so dependent on the US and so forth. Anyway, the last section I want to talk to you about has to do with this concept of the migration hump. This is not in your book. This is something that I learned and I expanded when I was working in Venezuela. My boss at the time was giving a talk at the Inter-American Development Bank, and he said, "Hey, Antonio, I need to put something together that explains this idea of how integration, migration, and economic development are working together." And it's like, what? So I started doing some research, and it turns out that there is some group of economists that years ago produced this so-called migration hump. When I was in Venezuela, one of the Andean countries, the presentation was going to center around the 5 Andean countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela. So my boss, his name is Fidel Jaramillo. Now he works for the World Bank in Washington, D.C. as one of the senior economists, a very interesting guy. He said, I want you to produce a chart that I can use, just one chart and the argument, so I can explain this idea. So, okay. So the basic idea of this chart is that the hump, basically, actually, let me just go straight to the chart. So you see the hump here, right? So the idea is that at earlier stages of economic development, countries experience, in many cases, significant disruptions, instability, and many people unhappy with that level of distortion tend to leave the country. They don't find jobs, there is no stability, and in some cases there is violence or whatever, right? So at early stages of economic development, let me annotate this here. Let's say here in blue, you're going to see that the people leaving the country is going up and up and up and up. And then you're going to reach a level where economic development is paired with a level of economic stability so that people don't have to leave the country anymore. They say, okay, we can live with this. And more advanced economies at the time, we're talking about 2000, 1999, 2000. So during those years, Bolivia and Ecuador were considered lagging behind in economic development. So Bolivia and Ecuador at the time were actually experiencing significant amount of out-migration, people leaving these countries. And Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela were the recipients of these countries. And also they were welcoming back some nationals of these 3 countries that had left before. So the more developed the country, the less the number of people living, or actually could become negative, meaning receiving countries. Obviously, I guess today, if you want to take this to the letter, let me clear this. Venezuela shouldn't be here. Venezuela is probably, I don't know, somewhere around here today, or maybe even here, reaching super high levels of outmigration. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but Venezuela is under such economic conditions right now that they are talking about the Venezuelan exodus. Millions and millions of people have left Venezuela. Some of them are moving to Colombia. Some of them are moving to Mexico. There is a significant amount of Venezuelan people with Italy, Portugal. So they are actually going all across the ocean to reunite with families of European families. And I don't have the numbers right now, but one of the reasons they are leaving is because everything is so scarce. Remember, Venezuela suffers from the Dutch disease. So when the price of oil goes down and the efficiency in the production of oil goes down, as it has been the case in Venezuela, they don't have the resources to buy toilet paper, toothpaste, medicine, food. It's terrible. In fact, again, and these are the numbers I don't have, but the average weight of the population in Venezuela of around 30 million people has dropped. Again, don't quote me on this, but close to between 5 and 10 pounds. I'm not joking. So the average weight of the population in Venezuela has been falling dramatically, between 5 and 10 pounds average. And this is not because they are exercising or they are, on a plant-based diet, or no, it's because food is scarce. I'm talking about, well, not famine, no starvation yet, but a significant lack of food that is forcing people to eat less. And I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, no wonder these guys are leaving. This is why we have this exodus, Venezuelan exodus. But anyway, I just wanted to share this with you in case you encounter this concept in the future. It's an interesting concept as to what drives migration. And in this case, I produced this table or this chart, and Fidel Jaramillo was very happy. He was able to capture in one chart what he wanted to communicate, and he was happy with me too. Anyway, the last section talks about remittances, and we talk about remittances already. So, and this is the end. This is page 23. So this is why, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have enough material for two lectures. So what I am going to do is that I'm going to stop right now and consider this, I don't know, 50 minutes or maybe less than that, the two lectures for Wednesday and Friday. And on Monday, I don't even know what the date of the month is, so let me check really quick. Monday, April 25th, we'll continue with the live lectures, starting with a new topic. All right, so thank you, everyone, and I will see you soon. Bye.